This is about eugenics in America. I thought I would check out some important Supreme Court decisions as a way of mapping a trajectory through American history. So I was looking at a list of books on the subject, and one title leaped out at me: Imbeciles, the Supreme Court, American Eugenics, and the Sterilization of Carrie Buck. I'm not surprised when I come across something in American history, a person or event, and I've never heard about it. It's a big country with about 250 years under its belt, so there are going to be things that have escaped my notice, especially since my notice is more or less a serendipitous activity. But it beats me to hell how I could whiff on an entire national movement, and a menacing one at that. I'm talking about eugenics in this country, from the turn of the 20th century on into the 1940s. It was a huge, powerful, very active force, and I know nothing about it. I have heard that the Nazis in Germany had been influenced in their thinking on Aryan superiority by some Americans, but I had no idea of the magnitude of this what? This belief, this science, this hope? The book, following the case of Buck v. Bell, makes it all very clear. By the 1930s, 41 states had eugenic marriage laws. The movement was led by all the top people: doctors, lawyers, academics. 376 universities and colleges had a course in eugenics, politicians and scientists. The word eugenics was coined by Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin. He said it was the science of improving the stock. In a very shallow way, and therefore a very accessible and convincing way, eugenics supplied a reasonable and even scientific approach to the improvement, if not the outright perfection, of the national gene pool. Believers were almost frantic about it. The movement gained its force from the work of Darwin, Herbert Spencer, and Gregor Mendel, who with his pea plants laid out the science of heredity. America embraced this thinking. The progressives were all about making the world a better place, and eugenics said, with seemingly irrefutable quantitative proof, that this was a real possibility. It was a movement dedicated to using scientific advances and government policy to create a better world, or at least a better America. This could be accomplished in two ways. The first was to limit immigration to Nordic stock and cut back the number of Italians, Poles, and Jews. Mixed in with the science was a lot of bigotry and white supremacy, hence the appeal to the Nazis. The second way was to stop defective people from reproducing. Those who were physically infirm and those who were deemed feeble of mind could be and should be sterilized. The idea was to sterilize the bottom 10% of the population, 15 million people, to avoid hereditary disaster. And the zealots came within a whisker of doing it, the very opposite of No Child Left Behind. With eugenics, there'd simply be no child. The American Breeders Association, concerned with farm animals, formed a committee to study and report on the most practical means of cutting off the defective gene plasm in the American population. That really was an organization. I'll read it again. Committee to study and report on the most practical means of cutting off the defective germ plasm in the American population. States passed laws legalizing eugenic sterilization, and they would be challenged and struck down. So people in Virginia decided that they would draft a law around a perfect candidate, one that would not be reversed, but would be sustained in court up to and including the Supremes. Once they got that verdict, they'd be set, and that's where Buck versus Bell comes in. And that's where Oliver Wendell Holmes comes in. He wrote the court's 8-1 majority decision, 5 paragraphs, culminating in this ringing pronouncement: 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. And so Carrie Buck was sterilized, along with 60 or 70,000 others. I just finished reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, in which the all-powerful crushed the defenseless and thought it was their natural right to do so. Holmes was perfect for his part in this case, choked with errors, lies, and smugness. His way of thinking was to let a law stand until it was so bad that it made him want to puke. Those are his words. He was an old coot, 86, an elitist prig, a true dyed-in-the-wool supremacist, favored by birth, a Boston Brahmin who took much pleasure in writing his cruel, unsubstantiated opinion, who considered himself superior in every way, and just thinking about him makes me want to puke. The very worst of us is in him, cloaked in dignity and decorum. Many people revered him, himself included, as well as his profound legal mind. In my book, he's the imbecile. The book provided me with the remedy to this lost part of our history, and it's a fine and necessary book, but because it traces the case from the local court to the State of Appeals to the Supremes, it is very repetitive, hammering home information and cries for justice that once they have been heard 3 or 4 times begin to lose their effect and lead to a restlessness and mild irritation in the reader. Even so, the shock of the eugenics movement in America remains yet another ghastly skeleton in the national closet.